February 20, 1945. The northern sector of Iwo Jima. Through the gray volcanic ash, Japanese defenders watched as another formation of American Sherman tanks approached their positions. But something was wrong. One of the vehicles had black smoke trailing from it, but not from damage. As its turret traversed toward a concrete bunker, the defenders saw that where the main gun should have been, there was something else. A modified barrel, a nozzle. Then came a sound they had never heard before. A mechanical hiss, like compressed air escaping. In the next instant, a torrent of burning fuel erupted across 150 yards of volcanic ash, engulfing the neighboring pillbox in napalm-thickened death. The screams lasted only seconds. The stunned survivors reached for their field telephones to report the unbelievable. They were facing weapons the Japanese defenders had never encountered, weapons that would fundamentally transform the nature of combat in the Pacific War's most brutal battle. To understand why this new weapon was so desperately needed, you have to understand the man who turned Iwo Jima into the most formidable defensive position in the Pacific. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, appointed to command the island in June 1944, understood with crystalline clarity that he could not defeat the Americans. His mission was fundamentally different: to make the capture of Iwo Jima so costly that the United States would reconsider invading the Japanese homeland. Kuribayashi had studied the failures at Saipan and Peleliu, where traditional Japanese tactics like launching massive banzai charges had proven catastrophically ineffective against American firepower. He made a revolutionary decision that broke with centuries of samurai tradition. There would be no glorious charges, no warriors seeking honorable death in open combat. Instead, his 21,000 men would fight from underground, turning Iwo Jima into a subterranean killing field. Kuribayashi had created an unsolvable problem, a fortress designed not to be held, but to bleed an entire invasion force dry. Kuribayashi's order transformed Iwo Jima's 8 square miles of volcanic rock into a fortress that defied conventional military doctrine. By the time of the invasion, his engineers had completed 11 miles of interconnected tunnel, with some sections reaching 7 stories deep into the solid volcanic rock. Above ground, 1,500 fortified positions dotted the landscape, concrete bunkers with walls 4 feet thick, all carefully placed to create interlocking fields of fire. This surface network was supported by 5,000 caves and underground chambers. This was not a simple defensive line. It was a subterranean fortress. It included underground hospitals with operating theaters, communications centers buried 75 feet below ground, and enough stored rice, water, and ammunition for a 2-month siege. For the Marines sailing towards it, this was a nightmare made of rock and steel, an engineering marvel designed to absorb any conventional attack and bleed them dry. Faced with this island fortress, the Americans responded with the only tool they knew: overwhelming industrial firepower. For 74 consecutive days, U.S. forces bombed and shelled the island. In total, 6,800 tons of explosives were dropped, and naval bombardment had hurled 22,000 shells onto Japanese positions. Confident in this massive preparation, American planners projected the island would fall in 5 days. They were catastrophically wrong. The bombardment had been a near-total failure. It had destroyed less than 200 of the 1,500 fortified positions, and the tunnel system remained virtually intact. Most Japanese soldiers hadn't even been scratched. All that firepower had been for nothing. The Marines landing on the black sand beaches were not attacking a shattered defense. They were walking headfirst into a fully armed and prepared killing field. With conventional firepower useless and Marines dying by the hundreds, the American command turned to a last-minute, top-secret project hidden away in Hawaii. 5 months before the invasion, at Schofield Barracks, Army Colonel George F. Unmacked assembled a team that would revolutionize armored warfare. His mission was to develop a weapon system capable of neutralizing Japanese cave and bunker complexes. Unmacked understood this required exceptional talent. His initial team from the 43rd Chemical Laboratory Company was joined by personnel from the 5th Marine Tank Battalion and, critically, 25 men from the 117th Naval Construction Battalion. These were the Seabees, whose mechanical genius and practical engineering skills were legendary throughout the Pacific. This unique joint service team was united by a single, brutal purpose: build a weapon that could burn the Japanese out of their caves. The challenge facing the team was daunting. Previous attempts to mount flamethrowers on tanks had produced mixed results. The most common system, the Canadian Ronson, had a range limited to 60 to 80 yards, a fuel capacity for only 30 to 40 seconds of fire, and a tendency to malfunction in combat. Working 20-hour days in the Hawaiian heat, sleeping in shifts beside their welding equipment, the Seabees created a revolutionary weapon designated the CB-H1. It represented a quantum leap in flamethrower technology. Its maximum range extended to 150 yards with thickened fuel, and it could maintain continuous fire for up to 80 seconds. But the most critical innovation was that the flamethrower replaced the tank's main gun. This allowed the gunner to aim the flame weapon as accurately as a conventional cannon, using the same periscope and controls. This wasn't just an upgrade. It was a complete reinvention. The Seabees hadn't just put a flamethrower on a tank, they had turned the tank into a precision flamethrower. But perhaps the most important innovation wasn't mechanical. It was psychological. The Seabees made a critical decision. The 8 modified tanks were painted in standard Marine Corps olive drab. There were no special markings, no indication of their terrible purpose. This was a deliberate and brilliant deception. To Japanese observers, they appeared to be ordinary Sherman tanks, preparing for another conventional, and likely futile assault. Japanese gunners couldn't identify them as priority targets because there was nothing to identify. The deception was perfect. The tank's greatest weapon wasn't just the flame, it was the element of complete surprise. By then it was too late. This deception was so effective because the Japanese had, in fact, meticulously prepared to fight flamethrowers. Intelligence reports from Saipan and Peleliu had emphasized the vulnerability of flamethrower operators. Based on this, special training emphasized anti-flamethrower tactics. Snipers received extra ammunition specifically for targeting flame operators, and infantry practiced rushing the weapon to exploit its minimum range. But this preparation was based on a fatal assumption. All Japanese planning assumed flamethrowers would be carried by infantry. The concept of an armored flamethrower, a tank that could approach under cover of its own armor, while delivering attacks at unprecedented range, had never been considered. Their fortifications, their greatest strength, had been designed to withstand artillery, but had no provisions against burning petroleum that could seep through apertures. Their greatest strength was about to become their tomb. On the morning of February 20th, D+1, the situation was desperate. The 21st Marine Regiment was pinned down, their advance stalled by 3 concrete pillboxes whose interlocking machine gun fire had already decimated 2 rifle companies. Having suffered devastating casualties, the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel William Duplantis, made the decision that would change the battle's trajectory. He called for the flamethrower tanks. The first tank, commanded by Staff Sergeant Robert Meza, approached the positions, appearing to the Japanese as just another standard Sherman. At 125 yards from the nearest pillbox, Meza gave the order. A stream of napalm-thickened fuel erupted with a sound witnesses described as the devil's own blowtorch. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. Temperatures inside the concrete structure soared past 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit in seconds, consuming the oxygen so rapidly that the defenders suffocated before the flames even reached them. The result was undeniable. In 2 hours, the Marines advanced 400 yards, more progress than they had made in the previous 2 days. The stalemate was broken. As devastating as the physical destruction was, the psychological effect of the flame tanks was even more profound. The weapon didn't just kill, it instilled a primal terror that shattered the enemy's will to fight. For the first time in the war, Japanese soldiers who had been trained to die at their posts began fleeing positions when they saw the flame tanks approaching, abandoning fortifications rather than face incineration. The terror was so absolute, it could be used as a weapon in itself. In one extraordinary instance, a tank commander approached a cave complex and triggered a short burst of flame into the air, a demonstration. The effect was unprecedented. Japanese soldiers began fleeing from rear exits, abandoning positions they had been ordered to defend to the death. An entire defensive sector collapsed, representing the first mass abandonment of defensive positions in Japanese military history. The paralysis went all the way to the top. In his final message, General Kuribayashi admitted, "The enemy's special flame tanks have proven more effective than all their artillery. We have no effective counter to this weapon." The tank crews themselves began to innovate, pushing their new weapons to the absolute limit. The most legendary example came on March 8th. During the assault on Cushman's Pocket, a complex of caves and bunkers built into a near-vertical cliff face. The Japanese defenders believed their elevated positions were immune, as the flamethrower's maximum 35-degree elevation was not enough to reach them. Tank Commander Sergeant Daniel Foster devised an ingenious solution. He ordered his driver to position the tank on a pile of rubble, tilting the entire vehicle backward to increase the firing angle. With the tank balanced precariously, the gunner fired. The molten napalm arced high into the air, seemed to hang for a moment, then cascaded down into the Japanese positions from above. The psychological impact was absolute. Witnesses reported Japanese soldiers leaping from the cliffs rather than burn alive, choosing death by falling over death by fire. This was the impossible shot, a moment that cemented the tank's legendary status. But the price of this victory was becoming apparent, not just for the Japanese, but for the American crews as well. The men who operated these weapons were not immune to the horror they unleashed. Tank crews reported severe psychological trauma from their role in the slaughter. Corporal Carlson of Tank 431 later testified, "You could hear them screaming when the flame hit. Not for long, but you heard it sometimes at night. I still hear it." The horror was inescapable. Maintenance crews found human remains fused to the tank tracks, requiring blowtorches to remove. These men had been instruments of a terrible necessity, wielding weapons that turned human beings to ash in seconds. They had done what duty demanded, but they would be forever haunted by the industrial scale of the slaughter they had been forced to unleash. But for all their power, the flamethrower tanks could not go everywhere. On the same day they were breaching Hill 382, the battle also revealed that individual courage was still a decisive force on the battlefield. When the tanks were maneuvering vainly to open a lane for the infantry, through a narrow ravine, Corporal Herschel Woody Williams volunteered his services. Williams advanced on foot with a 70-pound M2-2 portable flamethrower. In 4 hours of relentless combat, covered only by 4 riflemen, he single-handedly destroyed 7 pillboxes that were inaccessible to the tanks. His incredible feat, which would earn him the Medal of Honor, was a powerful reminder that technology had not replaced the individual Marine. Williams's technique complemented the flame tanks perfectly. Where the new machines of war couldn't go, a brave man with a weapon on his back still could. While the stories of individual heroism are powerful, the true impact of the flamethrower tanks is best understood through the cold, brutal calculus of war. The statistics gathered after the battle tell a remarkable story. In the first week of combat, the 8 tanks destroyed an estimated 300 fortified positions. In sectors where they operated, Marine casualties dropped by 40% compared to unsupported attacks. By the end of the 36-day battle, the tanks had destroyed over 1,000 fortified positions. Post-action analysis produced an even more stunning figure, crediting the tanks with reducing American casualties by an estimated 5,000 men. The effect on the Japanese was just as quantifiable. In total, over 30% of Japanese casualties on Iwo Jima were caused by flame weapons. In the final analysis, military analysts calculated that each flame tank potentially preserved 625 American casualties. The investment in technology had paid its dividends in blood not spilled. The impact of these 8 tanks, however, reached far beyond the shores of Iwo Jima. The flamethrower tanks represented something more than a new weapon. They embodied the transformation of warfare from individual courage to industrial capability. The age of the individual warrior prowess was ending, replaced by an era where victory belonged to nations capable of superior industrial production and technical innovation. The samurai spirit, for all its nobility, could not withstand liquid fire delivered by mass-produced machines. General Kuribayashi's defeat was not a failure of courage, but a collision with superior technology and innovation that his entire military doctrine could not comprehend. His men died defending positions they believed were impregnable, marking not just the end of a battle, but the end of an era when spiritual dedication could overcome material disadvantage. Here is the script for the requested section. Today, the grand story of technological warfare comes to rest in a quiet museum hall. The last surviving flamethrower tank from Iwo Jima sits in the National Museum of the Marine Corps. Its armor bears the scars of its service, but a small plaque cannot convey the horror or the necessity of its purpose. The final testament belongs not to the machine, but to the men. At the last reunion of the flame tank veterans, Corporal Anthony Vitelli offered this poignant observation. "People ask if I'm proud of what we did. Pride isn't the right word. We did a terrible job that had to be done. Those tanks saved Marine lives. That's enough." Perhaps the most profound legacy came in 1985, during a reconciliation ceremony on the island. Former tank commander Robert Meza stood with former Lieutenant Koshi Yamada, who had witnessed that first attack 40 years earlier. Through an interpreter, Yamada said, "I hated you for 40 years, but I understand now. War makes monsters of us all. You did what you had to do, as did we." The two old warriors then embraced.